Loyalty, especially to family, has always meant something to me. I was raised with the idea that if you poured your heart into something, worked hard, and gave it your all, it would be appreciated, honored, rewarded. I was mistaken. On a typical evening at what ought to have been a straightforward family meal, everything went wrong. In my parents' mansion, I was sitting at the enormous dining table, the spotless white tablecloth softly illuminated by the crystal chandelier. Richard Caldwell, my father, sat at the head of the table, cutting into his steak with careful strokes. My sister Emily was sitting across from me, sipping her wine with a cunning, smug smirk on her lips as her immaculately manicured fingers delicately gripped the glass. I couldn't get rid of the stress that was building. There was something strange, but I couldn't quite identify it. My mother sat rigid and uneasy, her eyes darting between Dad and me as if she wanted to say something but was afraid to do so. I made myself break the stillness at last. Dad, I said warily, you said you wanted to talk about the company's future tonight. Is something evolving? He continued, chopping his steak as if I hadn't said anything, without even looking up. He hesitated for a long, painful moment before he eventually groaned, as though the thing he was going to say were a tedious task. Yes, he stated bluntly, some adjustments will occur. Emily will become the CEO of Caldwell Enterprises. The remarks were like a kick to the stomach. I strained to maintain a steady voice while my hands tightened beneath the table. You mean Emily will be the business's owner? I insisted, stifling my growing worry. After putting down his knife and fork, my father looked up at me as if I were a child who didn't comprehend. Let's be realistic, Lauren, he added in a patronizing tone. There is no doubting that you excel at technological tasks. However, leadership? You're not good at that. Someone who commands respect and has presence is what we need. There is no better option than your sister. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Painful knots formed in my gut, and I looked at Emily, who was virtually beaming with victory. When the business was about to fail, she had done nothing to help. I couldn't sleep since she wasn't there for the late hours, the never-ending calculations, or the code that made my eyes burn. I was the one who created the program that preserved our family's history, not her. I felt a burning anger and compelled myself to speak. I spoke more sharply than I meant to when I said, I created the software that saved this business. Caldwell Enterprises wouldn't exist without it. Everything would have been lost for you. As if I had said something endearing, Dad had the audacity to laugh. Then he took his wallet out of his pocket and tossed a crumpled $50 bill on the table. As if I were a waiter who had just replenished his coffee, he replied contemptuously, For your effort. I was frozen with disbelief as I gazed at the bill. $50. He valued my blood, sweat, tears, and years of dedication for that reason. I grabbed for the bill with trembling hands and folded it gingerly into my napkin. I kept my eyes off Emily. I avoided looking at Mom. I just looked at the man I had once admired and put so much effort into making proud. He failed to notice me. I was not respected by him. To him, I had just ever been a practical instrument, something to be thrown away after I had fulfilled my function. I forced a tight smile and swallowed the thick knot in my throat. I understand, I muttered, scarcely raising my voice above a breath. Dad laughed and waved his hand as if I were being dramatic. Don't be silly, Lauren, he said. However, I no longer gave a damn about his opinion. My chair's legs scraped the slick floor as I carefully pushed it back. With my head held high, I stood up. I gently answered, I'm not being dramatic, and fixed my steady stare on his eyes. I'm simply making an excuse. I will leave the scene because it is obvious that I am only a supporting character in this household. Emily, obviously satisfied with herself, snickered behind her glass. Mom started to say something, but I interrupted her. I pivoted on my heel and left, not wanting them to know how close I was to losing it. The chilly night air felt like a slap as I went outside, but it didn't lessen the intense ache that was tearing at my chest. Before the first sob could escape, I reached my car and slammed the door behind me while holding onto the steering wheel till my knuckles became white. That firm tossed me aside without a second thought, even though I had given everything to them, including my family. They took my success and accomplishments and gave them to Emily as if they were a gift I never earned. It made no difference how many late nights I spent, how many weekends I spent, or how many years I sacrificed everything to save them from financial ruin. I forced myself to breathe as I brushed away my tears with shaky hands. They assumed I would simply accept being cast aside and vanish without a trace. They had no idea who I was. Did they wish to exclude me? All right, I would allow them. However, I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to stand by and let them ruin everything I had created. They were in for another surprise if they believed they could break me so quickly. Watch me was the only thought that raced through my head as I took one more glance at the mansion that was glowing behind me. I arrived at the office the following morning as if nothing had happened, strutting confidently through the lobby. But something was odd. The entire building seemed to be holding its breath, and the atmosphere was tense. Workers gave me a short glance before turning away, and as soon as I was gone, their muttering stopped. I forced myself to ignore the pain and headed for my office, or what was formerly my office. I felt sick to my stomach as I rounded the bend. The room was unoccupied and the door was ajar. My computer was gone, my desk was gone, and the nameplate that used to read Lauren Caldwell, CTO, was no longer there. Emily was sitting in my chair looking through some files as if she owned the room. Her lips formed a horribly sweet smile as she raised her head. She purred, "Oh, good morning, Lauren. Did Dad not tell you? I'll be relocating to this office. You will now report to me." The ground seemed to have fallen away from me. Refusing to show her how much she had shaken me, I composed myself. "And what precisely is my new position?" I asked in a composed tone. Emily tapped a finger across her chin, pretending to be thoughtful. With an airy tone, she said, "We'll figure something out. Perhaps it assistance or anything comparable, controllable. In fact, Dad advised you to take a break. Calm down. Take on a small hobby project or two, perhaps. Let the true leaders take care of things, you know." Even though my blood was boiling, I maintained a neutral demeanor. It assistance. In the business, I started from scratch. I had prevented the company's financial downfall. Without me, the business wouldn't even be in existence. I couldn't help but note how out of place she appeared as she reclined back in my chair, looking like a queen on her throne, playing dress-up like a child who had no idea how serious her position was. I wanted to march into my father's office, yell at her, demand answers, and force him to give me an explanation for why he was discarding me like yesterday's garbage. However, I didn't, since I was aware that nothing would change. Emily was enjoying the radiance of her unmerited triumph after Dad had made his decision. I simply nodded slowly and deliberately instead. "Understood," I muttered. Emily appeared momentarily perplexed, as if she had anticipated a more intense altercation. She didn't get the gratification from me. Despite my heart feeling like it was breaking, I simply turned and left, keeping my head held high. I was sitting at a corner table in the coffee shop across the street, my hands encircling a steaming cup that I couldn't recall ordering. As I tried to figure out how it had all gone so wrong, my thoughts raced. I had done everything correctly, made sacrifices, constructed something amazing, and they just threw me away. It went beyond simple treachery. It was humiliation. My sister had taken my position after my own father had abandoned me, and I had lost everything I had fought for. I forced myself to think properly. Even though the pain was so intense that I could hardly breathe, I couldn't let myself get destroyed. Not right now. My phone buzzed on the table while I sat there, numb, and stared at the foam churning in my cup. The person who had kept the company's books balanced when we were drowning in red ink was Jake, our former CFO. I spoke more steadily than I felt when I picked up the phone. I said, "Hey," to him. "Lauren," he said in a low, solemn voice. "I was informed of what transpired. Are you all right?" I laughed resentfully. "Explain, okay?" After a pause, Jake's voice became softer. "Come see me at the small Fifth Avenue cafe. David and Maya will also be attending. We must speak." There was a brief moment of hesitation on my part. I answered, "I'll be there." Jake, Maya, and David were waiting for me when I entered the cafe, the three people in the world that I trusted the most. David appeared as though he was prepared to shake hands with anyone who disobeyed me. Jake nodded at me, and Maya smiled empathetically. Jake leaned forward as I took a seat. Without introducing himself, he declared, "We're in." I tried to catch up by blinking. "What are you in for?" He looked at Maya, who continued where he had left off. With firmness, she declared, "We're done with Caldwell Enterprises. They're not worthy of us. Together, we're creating something new. We're on board with whatever you want to build." I gazed at them, attempting to comprehend the steadfast devotion in their gaze. When bankruptcy threatened and our rivals were circling like vultures, these were the people who had supported me through the worst of times. Even when everyone else gave up on me, they didn't. David's voice was angry as he leaned forward. "They believe they have triumphed," he snarled. "However, they are mistaken. Once more, they have underestimated you. Let's demonstrate your true abilities to them." I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety as my heart raced. Am I capable of doing this? Create something completely different from the ground up? I reflected on the software that transformed the logistics sector, my software. The one I made was long before Caldwell Enterprises was a part of it. A gradual, resolute smile appeared on my face. I whispered, "They think they can just replace me. They believe that I'll just roll over and take being shoved aside. However, they are unaware of what is about to happen." With a look of intense pride in his eyes, Jake lifted his glass. "To the Nova Systems," he said. We echoed, clinking glasses, "To Nova," and for the first time since that terrible supper, I felt a strong and warm fire burn within me. We laid out the blueprint for something bigger that evening, something that neither Emily nor my father could touch. I would start my own business that prospered on merit rather than nepotism. And as I glanced across the table at those who unwaveringly supported me, I was certain that Caldwell Enterprises had just committed its greatest error. The ensuing weeks passed quickly, filled with late nights and brainstorming sessions driven by caffeine. Even after I moved closer to the office, I kept my old apartment downtown, which is where we set up shop. It was little, filled with outdated technology and unfinished projects, but it belonged to us. While Maya built up data models on a spare display, Jake brought in his old laptop and began doing some math. I stood right next to David, my fingers gliding over the keyboard as we worked through and tested every line of code he was deep in, adjusting the structure for our new product. I felt more alive than I had in years, even if it was exhausting. We were creating a future rather than merely a commodity. It was a legacy that no one, not even my father or Emily, could take away. One night, with black circles under his eyes but a fire still glowing brightly, Jake looked up from his laptop. "You're aware that they'll pursue us?" He raised an eyebrow in question. Without hesitation, I looked him in the eye. With a steely resolution in my voice, I said, "Let them try. They don't know what's coming." After 2 demanding months, we released our software's initial beta version. Although it wasn't flawless, it was better than Caldwell Enterprises could have ever imagined in terms of speed, flexibility, and intuitiveness. We focused on up-and-coming logistics firms that required creative solutions but couldn't afford to risk money on unproven technology. The reaction was tremendous. We signed our first contract, a multi-million-dollar agreement that made Nova Systems famous. In a matter of weeks, I refrained from thinking about the implications for Caldwell Enterprises. I wasn't looking back because I was too busy going forward. One evening, my phone buzzed on the table as we were finishing off a successful customer demo. I almost burst out laughing as I looked at the screen. Emily was the one. I let it ring, but very soon a message appeared. "Hey, Lauren, I wanted to talk. Can we meet? Please." I couldn't resist laughing. She wanted to talk now? Now that Nova Systems was becoming popular and in the news? I put my phone in my bag and turned it off, concentrating on the future rather than the past. Emily wasn't the only person who noticed our success either. Our clientele tripled in only 3 months, and Nova was being highlighted as the next big disruptor in trade publications. Caldwell Enterprises was bleeding in the meantime. Through rumors in the computer industry, I learned of their difficulties. Emily was making poor choices, signing contracts she didn't fully comprehend, and destroying relationships with longtime collaborators. Jake stormed into the loft one evening, clutching his phone as if it were a fire. He continued, his eyes bright with barely controlled eagerness. "You're going to want to see this." He gave it to me after bringing up an item on his screen. The headline said, "Caldwell Enterprises on the brink. Poor leadership and outdated technology to blame." With my heart pounding, I quickly skimmed the piece. The company's lack of innovation was being openly criticized by industry insiders, who also pointed out that Caldwell was falling behind Nova Systems' new software solutions. I couldn't deny the rush of satisfaction it gave me, but it was brutal. David smiled as he peered over my shoulder. It appears that the empire is collapsing, he joked. I suppressed a grin. I said, they did it to themselves, but in all honesty, it was really satisfying to watch it unfold. My phone buzzed once more a few days later, as I was reviewing project deadlines with Maya. It was my mom this time. I was prepared for whatever guilt trip she was about to give me, so I paused before responding. Lauren, she replied, sounding as though she had been crying. You are needed by your father. A resentful chuckle rose in my throat. I shot back. He needed me months ago, but he made it clear what I was worth to him, a demotion and $50. She sniffed, obviously not anticipating a fight from me. She insisted, he didn't mean it like that. This place is not good, the business. It's disintegrating. Emily is making every effort, but I interrupted her, sounding as icy as iron. Mom, she wasn't prepared. You were all aware of it. However, you wanted someone who could woo investors at upscale dinners and who looked the part. You didn't give a damn about who did the labor. Quiet. Then softly, Lauren, he's sorry. I rubbed my temples and moaned. With a hint of fatigue in my voice, I answered, it's too late to apologize. Everyone made a decision. You have to live with it now. My heart thumping, I hung up before she could answer. It wasn't over, I knew. They wouldn't simply ignore it. And I was correct. A week later, my assistant Claire knocked on the door while I was doing diagnostics on our newest feature. Lauren, you have guests, she observed warily. My heart fell. Who is it? She paused. Your sister and father. The lobby is where they are. I made myself maintain my composure by clenching my jaw. I remarked in a chilly voice. Send them to the conference room. I was struck by how drastically they had altered as soon as they entered. My dad's face was drawn and worn out, and he appeared older. Emily's typical haughtiness was replaced by an almost desperate expression, as if she hadn't slept in days. Lauren, Dad began in a tone that was unusually quiet. We need your assistance. I simply leaned back in my chair and waited for him to continue without answering. His pride was visibly damaged when he said, the company is failing. We made a mistake. Emily wasn't equipped to handle the duty. Emily yelled, you sabotaged us, and glared at me. When you left, you knew exactly what you were doing. You desired for us to disintegrate. I couldn't stop myself from laughing out loud. Are you serious? Emily, you threw me out. I was clearly not welcome, as you stated. You're accusing me of being incompetent now? Her face flushed, but Dad interrupted her in a more begging tone than I had ever heard. Please, he whispered quietly. Lauren, return. Assist us in rebuilding. I'll make it worthwhile for you. I looked at him in disbelief that he genuinely believed I had returned. You still don't understand. I shook my head in response. You threw me away as if I didn't exist. You made me feel unworthy and embarrassed me in front of the entire family. And now you're here pleading for assistance because you can't clean up your own mess? He swallowed forcefully, and I noticed genuine remorse in his eyes for the first time. However, nothing changed as a result. I was no longer the gullible girl who was frantically trying to win his approval. I had created something superior that they were unable to take away. I got to my feet and met their eyes. I'm not returning, I firmly declared. You are curious about life without me. You know now. They quietly departed, and I didn't feel victorious. Simply, I'm relieved, because I at last realized that my value was independent of their approval. I had done it myself. I had disproved them. Furthermore, I wasn't turning around. They didn't look like the strong, untouchable individuals they once were. As I watched them depart the conference room, their shoulders hunched. My father had always been a strong, uncompromising man who demanded respect. I should have been pleased to see him like that, defeated and hollowed out. Rather, it simply felt vacant. I rubbed my temples and fell into my chair when they were eventually gone. A few minutes later, David cautiously peered in. Is everything all right? I smiled tightly and slightly at him. Indeed. Only a hint of déjà vu. They desired for me to return and rescue Caldwell Enterprises. He crossed his arms and snorted. I bet your response didn't sit well with them. They didn't, I shrugged and said. But I don't have that problem anymore. With a steady and encouraging stare, David approached and pulled up a chair. You made the correct decision, he remarked. They don't deserve you now, just as they didn't value you when they had you. That was what I wanted to think. Yes, I did. However, a part of me was unable to get rid of the guilt that kept coming back to me, that tiny, persistent voice that said I was allowing my family to fail. I suppressed it, telling myself that I had made my decision and they had made theirs. I was drinking coffee in the office early the following morning when Claire arrived carrying a pile of reports. Have you watched the news, Lauren? With a nervous tone, she inquired. I took my phone off the desk, opened the business feed, and scowled. Like a chilly hand, the headline struck me in the face. Amid a leadership crisis, Caldwell Enterprises declares bankruptcy. As I gazed at the screen, I detachedly read through the details. Officially, my father's empire, the business I had given so much of myself to create and preserve, was no more. Creditors were waiting in line to dissect the remains of their stock, which had fallen to nothing. I put down the phone just as David entered. He must have noticed my look because he opened the identical article on his iPad right away. Oh no, he whispered. For them, it's over. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let reality set in without saying a word. When they pushed me out and put Emily in control, it was exactly what I thought would happen. However, it was one thing to know it and quite another to watch it happen. A part of me wanted to celebrate the poetic justice of it all and feel justified. Mostly, though, I simply felt numb. I didn't want to win like this. I didn't want Caldwell Enterprises to fail. All I wanted was to be regarded and valued for my accomplishments. Jake entered next, his palm burning from gripping his phone. Do you notice this? He shook his head incredulously as he asked. Caldwell is finished. Totally. Yes, I said softly. He arched one eyebrow, obviously anticipating more from me. Are you all right? I made an effort to grin. I suppose I simply didn't anticipate this outcome. After giving me a pitying gaze, he looked to David, who simply shrugged, perhaps saying, Give her time. As a diversion, I took out my laptop and opened our financials after they had departed. I had to keep going and continue developing Nova systems. I couldn't afford to think about what had already been completed. However, life had other ideas. Claire arrived at my office a few days later with an exceptionally pale face. Lauren, your dad is present. He is insistent on seeing you. I was overcome with fatigue. Send him in, I replied, preparing myself. He appeared older than I had ever seen him, with bent shoulders as he entered slowly. There was only a weary, broken guy, no haughtiness, no dominant presence. Instead of sitting down, he simply stood there and stared at me, as if he was unsure of how to start. At last, he muttered in a harsh, hollow voice, They took everything. The office building, the automobiles, the house, everything is gone. I nodded while maintaining a neutral look. I understand. Hands shaking, he swallowed. Emily. She returned to live with your mom, blames me for everything. That nearly made me laugh. Emily is typical in that she always assigns blame when things don't go her way. I didn't say it aloud, though. Rather, I simply gazed at him, anticipating whatever justification he could have in store. His words were hardly more than a whisper as he lowered his eyes. He said, I never imagined it would come to this. I believed. I believed that putting Emily in control was the correct thing to do. I believed she could manage it. However, I was mistaken. You were underestimated by me. You have always been underestimated by me. The meaning of the phrases ought to have been clear. They ought to have rekindled some dormant hope that perhaps he had finally seen me. However, they didn't. Simply put, they felt empty too little, too late. He inhaled tremblingly and raised his beseeching gaze to me. Lauren, please, assist me in rebuilding it. We can begin again. This time, I'll give you complete command, I promise. My heart felt oddly at ease as I gazed at him. Do you not understand? Silently, I said. You didn't simply destroy a business. Your family was destroyed by you. You gave me the impression that I was never good enough, and that my accomplishments would never measure up to your golden kid. He started to argue, but I interrupted him. Emily looked the part, which is why you picked her. You believed that appearances were more significant than content. You expect me to mend it now that everything has fallen apart. in order to rescue you from the mess you made. However, that is no longer my duty." His face was etched with defeat as his shoulders drooped. He muttered, "I'm sorry," and I nearly believed him. However, I was aware. With a hard yet kind tone, I declared, "I built something better. I created Nova Systems without your consent or assistance, and it's succeeding because I know how to lead. Caldwell Enterprises is not necessary for me. You are not necessary for me." He appeared broken, and I didn't feel bad about it for the first time in my life. He wrecked himself. "I wasn't the one who did it." I nodded toward the door and said, "Goodbye, Dad." After a moment of hesitation, as if he wanted to fight back, he simply bowed and left, dejected. I experienced an odd, overwhelming sense of freedom when the door clicked shut. I was no longer his daughter seeking acceptance. The girl who was trying to prove herself wasn't me. I was the lady who created an empire out of nothing, Lauren Caldwell. I also didn't want to waste any more time searching in the past. After that last run-in with my father, I spent 3 months putting all of my energy into taking Nova Systems to the next level. We streamlined our operations, landed deals with major players in the sector, and released software improvements that left rivals rushing to catch up. I entered the office every day with a purpose, and was welcomed by people who respected me for what I had created. Not because of my name. There was constant news about Caldwell Enterprises' demise. Every error and careless choice Emily made was examined in articles. I didn't really enjoy it, but there was a certain satisfaction in witnessing the truth being revealed so openly. Industry observers referred to it as the fastest collapse of a tech empire in recent history. For once, the world realized what I had always known. They had nothing without me. Claire knocked on my office door one afternoon as I was poring over our most recent quarterly report, which showed record earnings and skyrocketing client happiness. She looked nervous. She put a printed page on my desk and said, "Lauren, you need to see something." When I picked it up and read the headline, my eyes opened. "The assets of Caldwell Enterprises will be liquidated. An auction is planned for next week." I took a deep breath and leaned back. They had truly reached their lowest point. Everything was for sale, including the patents, the trademark rights, and the headquarters. It was the last nail in the coffin of the business that had previously controlled the logistics sector. David noticed the expression on my face and wandered in. "Are you all right?" he whistled softly as he quickly read the paper I had given him. "Gosh, isn't it true that they are selling everything?" "Yes," I muttered. "It's finished." His eyes were questioning as he looked at me. "Are you considering purchasing them?" After giving it some thought, I shook my head. "No. Nothing remains that is worth preserving. I didn't build Nova to drag about Caldwell Enterprises' carcass. I designed it to go forward." He gave a nod of consent. "All okay. You've already shown that you can create your own legacy without theirs." As the week went by and the auction approached, I couldn't shake that thought. I didn't go. I didn't want to be there, sifting through the wreckage of a business that used to mean the world to me. Rather, I continued to work, advancing Nova and keeping my eyes on the prize. I once stood on the balcony outside my office, gazing out over the city, after most of the workers had left for the evening. I allowed the peace to descend upon me as the sun began to set, illuminating the sky with amber and rose hues. When my phone buzzed in my pocket, I took it out and was shocked to discover a strange number on it. I briefly considered ignoring it, but for some reason I picked it up. "Hey?" After a lengthy silence, a voice that I hadn't heard in months murmured softly, "It's Mom, Lauren." I forced myself to remain calm and swallowed hard. "What are you looking for?" She paused as if she was trying to find the proper words. "Your dad. His health is not good. His health changed after the bankruptcy. The tension, it has simply been excessive. I believed you ought to be aware. I felt a twinge of something, perhaps sadness or remorse, but I suppressed it." "Why are you just now telling me this?" I asked in a sharper than intended tone. Because he feels bad about it," she said. "Everything. How he treated you, how he elevated Emily. He simply didn't know how to acknowledge his mistake. Lauren, he's proud of you. He simply never knew how to express it." I took a while to reply. There was a part of me that wanted to hold on to the hope that he had finally recognized me for who I was. However, a part of me was unable to let go of the years of suffering, of being ignored and forgotten. He made his decisions, I responded at last. I did the same. Mom didn't dispute. Perhaps she was aware that it wouldn't matter, she whispered. I just thought you should know. Lauren, look after yourself. As night fell, I lowered the phone and stared out at the city as the line went dead. I couldn't decide whether I should be happy that he finally understood or upset that he had to lose everything in order to see me. Perhaps both. I learned a few days later that several of Caldwell's previous contracts had been formally assumed by Nova Systems. Our status as the new industry leader was solidified, and our clientele was growing. I felt completely at ease for the first time in years. Jake discovered me in the lobby one evening when I was shutting up the office, smiling as if he had a secret. Are you attending tomorrow night's Innovators Gala? He inquired. I arched an eyebrow. I had no idea I had been invited. He gave a snort. The keynote speaker is you. Of course, you're welcome. I paused at the concept. My father used to boast about this very gala, where he would take center stage and bask in the adulation and admiration. It was me they wanted to talk to now. I felt stronger than ever as I got out of the car on the night of the event wearing a sleek, fitted black dress. Heads turned as I entered, with murmurs trailing behind me like shadows. I didn't give a damn. This was something I deserved. Even though the ballroom was opulent and full of investors and tech tycoons, I hardly saw them. When my name was announced, I just approached the podium while scanning the crowd. I inhaled deeply before speaking in a calm, assured tone. I started by saying, a year ago, I believed that my value was dependent on the approval of others. I believed that success entailed being picked, welcomed, and commended. However, I was mistaken. Making the decision to believe in your own value, even when no one else does, is the key to true success. I could hardly hear the thundering applause. I simply felt a sense of completion that I hadn't realized I needed as I gazed out into that sea of faces. I stayed close to the bar after the speech, drinking champagne and observing the audience. At that moment, I noticed my father and Emily standing close to the entryway, appearing uncomfortable and unsure. Dad looked at me and nodded weakly, and I simply nodded in return, acknowledging in silence that the past was finally over. I stayed away from them. I didn't have to. They had been removed from my story. I felt lighter than I have in years as I walked out of the gala that evening. Despite their skepticism and not because of their approbation, I had created something amazing. I had demonstrated that I was valuable without Caldwell Enterprises. I couldn't help but smile as I got into the car and drove home because I knew I was right where I was supposed to be.